Ever since its construction in 1937, the stretch of Highway 1 at Devil's Slide between Pacifica and Montara in San Mateo County has caused major headaches for local residents. Just about every 10 years during heavy rains, the roadbed sinks and is closed to traffic. In response, Caltrans has insisted on a single solution, a huge freeway bypass that would carve through Montara Mountain and bisect McNee Ranch State Park.
It was part of Caltrans's plan in the 60s to build a freeway down the coast from San Francisco all the way to San Luis Obispo. And this was going to be part of a massive freeway system that was going to provide for development of the coast and other areas. And the freeway bypass of Devil's Slide was going to be 4 to 6 lanes wide down to Half Moon Bay Airport and then continue on down the coast.
Well, in the 60s, and I guess it was up until the late 60s, people heard about it. They found out what was going on. And in the counties to the south, they all decided, hey, we don't want that. Get that damn thing out of here. So they voted to turn it down. They wouldn't accept it. But in San Mateo County, we had a lot of political pressure.
Yes, Henry Dolger had bought a lot of land on the coast around Half Moon Bay that he was planning to develop in the same kind of way that he developed Daly City. But he wasn't the only one who had visions for the coast of development. Half Moon Bay, in those days it was planned that Half Moon Bay would be a city of about 200,000 people by the year 2000. And down around Pescadero, there's supposed to be another 100,000 people. So this freeway was very important to those kinds of plans being implemented. If you build it, they will come.
In 1969, the National Environmental Policy Act was passed. And so we told Caltrans that they had to do an environmental impact statement. When I say we, I mean the people on the coast. And there was an El Granada organization, a La Honda organization, there were just another General Save the Coast organization, plus the Sierra Club, the Committee for Green Foothills, and the Committee for the Permanent Repair of Highway 1, and so forth. So we gathered together our attorneys, and we met with their attorneys at a big long table, and all these people, and our attorneys read the law to them, and they told them they couldn't do it. They had to do an EIS. And they said, go jump in the lake, we're not going to do it. So in 1970, land of 1970, they went out to bid, and they were going to build it. So when they went out to bid, we went to court, and all these organizations joined together, and we said they had to do an EIS. And in 1972, the decision came through, they had to do an EIS. And they were mad. They said, we're not going to do it. And so they lost their federal funding, and they lost the state funding, and they lost the federal and state approvals. They had no approvals, and here they had already illegally purchased this part of the right-of-way. They had no right to do that at all. That's against the law.
And then in 1972, the people passed Proposition 20, which said we want to preserve the coast, and there should be a coastal plan developed for the whole state to preserve the rural lands of the coast and direct development to a fairly tight-knit urban area. And the legislature specifically says in the Coastal Act that Highway 1 is to remain a scenic 2-lane road in the rural areas of the coast, up and down the state. San Mateo's plan was the first county plan to be approved, and it was approved in 1980, and it draws a very firm boundary around the city of Half Moon Bay and these little communities, and that's called the urban-rural boundary. So on the urban side, that's where development should occur. That's where the services are, water and sewer and road capacity. And on the rural side, the land is supposed to be preserved for agricultural use and for protection of other resources, the streams, wildlife, the visual qualities, timber harvesting, preserving of other sensitive habitats.
Things were pretty quiet at Devil's Slide throughout the rest of the 1970s. but everyone knew it was just a matter of time before nature once again played her hand. In 1983, during heavy rainstorms, Devil's Slide began slumping towards the ocean and was closed for 87 days. But this time local residents and environmentalists had an alternative to the freeway bypass, a repair known as the Marine Disposal Alternative.
The marine disposal alternative was actually originally proposed by Caltrans, and was actually implemented in a couple places throughout the state. And they came up with the idea that this would be one of the ways to deal with Devil's Slide. The whole idea there is to cut back into the hillside enough so that you relieve the pressure of the slide and put in the appropriate drainage, so that you don't have to worry about the earth movements of the slope carrying the road away. The term marine disposal actually comes from the fact that the material that you move from above the road, you push to the other side of the road, and it builds up above the ocean to sort of extend out from the existing cliff. So some of the material does fall into the ocean.
Despite the fact that the marine disposal alternative was first proposed by Caltrans, when Highway 1 closed in 1983, the agency had no intention of building anything but the bypass. This was due in part to a shift in the political climate.
I guess it was 1982, shortly after I'd started this project, the Devil's Slide project as the environmental coordinator, there was a significant change within the organization with the election of George Deukmejian. And it really affected everybody. And I guess at the time I was kind of naive about how significant these effects were going to be. And it's probably not by coincidence that George Deukmejian's director of transportation, Leo Trombatori, was the project engineer on the Devil's Slide project when the Sierra Club stopped it in the 1970s. And his assistant engineer, Birch Bechtold, was appointed district director for Caltrans District 4 in San Francisco. And his assistant engineer, Robert Jarlin, was appointed deputy director for project development for District 4. At the time, I didn't know all this and didn't put it together, but I guess if I had, I would have thought, these guys worked on the Devil's Slide project. They believed what they were doing was the right thing. They were sued and stopped on the project, and then after Deukmejian was elected, they're in charge of the organization and we're gearing up to do Devil's Slide. I probably would have thought, well, God, putting all these facts together, this is not a good omen. Things to come.
We felt that the best solution would be to dig out the existing slide and move the highway into the mountain. And that was not our idea. It was an idea that was developed by the California Transportation Laboratory of Caltrans. Well, what Caltrans did, they took that report, which had recommended a rather modest project, and they increased the length of the repair from about, I think the repair was going to be about 1,000 feet. And they increased it to 4,300 feet. And when they described this project in the EIS, it was 4,300 feet long. It had a seawall 70 feet high for a length of 4,300 feet. And it was going to move 15 million cubic yards of rock and stuff. And it was going to be, of course, widened to 300 feet, make a 300-foot wide shelf there where the road is now. And this was their project. And of course, it was going to be terribly expensive. It was going to cost much more than the bypass. So it was totally impractical, and they threw it out as impractical.
In hindsight, maybe we would have come to a different conclusion once we saw how these numbers were sort of, kind of fake. Like the marine disposal alternative, the cost was jacked up really high, and the adopted alignment was really low. And it was apparent that they were playing games with these numbers, and that probably no one really knows how much the cost of the bypass is going to be. And if, my guess would be that's probably at least 10 times more than what Caltrans is saying it's going to be.
We have affidavits from people who used to work at Caltrans that they were instructed not to talk to environmental groups, and some of their conclusions that they made in their environmental studies had been altered by people higher up at Caltrans.
you know, many of those reports that reflected poorly on the bypass were changed at the last minute rather capriciously by Caltrans management that had no technical expertise in the area that they were changing. I mean, all they're concerned with is delete significant, delete adverse. It's an impact, you know, and in the case of the growth study, they just eliminated the growth study even though the reference was maintained in the draft EIS.
Caltrans's EIS, when they finally did do the work, selected the long bypass that they had always wanted to build as their preferred project. There was a huge amount of controversy over this project, and ultimately the Board of Supervisors who had to approve the project, approved a shorter bypass, but it still is the same destructive freeway project through the rural area around Montara Mountain, up and over Montara Mountain, with huge cuts and fills and great damage done to the streams and to the state park. So after that was approved by the county, it had to go to the Coastal Commission for approval, and initially the Coastal Commission rejected it, and then 4 months later, after the county asked the commission to reconsider, one commissioner changed his vote, so it was approved by that one commissioner's change of vote, very narrow approval. The county Board of Supervisors also had approved it on a 3-2 vote, so it was not a winning proposal, really. It's very controversial.
It's graded for 6 lanes. It's to be paved for 4 lanes. It's to be striped for 3 lanes, and it's called a 2-lane road. Isn't that wonderful?
The freeway bypass was so controversial that a number of environmental and community groups immediately took Caltrans to court, arguing that the road would destroy a state park.
The major lawsuit had to do with taking parkland. Well, taking has been defined by the courts as anything that would make it impossible to use the land for a park. So we argued that this would totally destroy the recreational value of the park because it would cut the trail, the major trail of San Pedro, in 12 different places. Well, we won the first, in Judge Peckham's court. He said that it would destroy the scenic, recreational, and environmental quality of the park. That was in his decision. And so we were related. That would mean that they would have to study alternatives. That's what we wanted them to do. Well, they were not about to study it. At any time during this lawsuit, which has gone on for 10 years now, Caltrans could have said, we will make these studies, and the lawsuit would have been ended. That would have been the end of it. They could have stopped that lawsuit, the snap of their fingers, say, we'll make a study.
So again, the permanent repair of Highway 1 was put on hold, and things were quiet for a decade until the road began to slide in 1995.
When the road closed in January of '95, my most immediate response was one of complete frustration, not only for myself, but for my husband, who had to commute over the hill every day, and his commute jumped to about 3 hours a day, and to solve that, he would get up at 4:30 in the morning, so pretty frustrating for all of us.
In general, what the closure was about was Caltrans's effort to do what it has always done in the past when the road closed, and that would be to secure emergency funds and promote construction of the alternative which they preferred, which was the highway bypass of Devil's Slide. Historically, we have documents going back to 1961 that lay out precisely that approach. Wait until there's a road closure, go after the emergency funds at that time. That happened in 1983 when Tom Lantos came out and was told by the head of Caltrans in public testimony that the best they could do with that road is open it for traffic in one direction with flagmen. And then in '83 or in '84, as a result of that, he secured emergency funds, $50 million for the repair, reconstruction of Highway 1. And they immediately went about the business of transferring those funds over to the project which they preferred, which was a 4-lane highway bypass of Devil's Slide. The bypass project is still essentially, construction-wise, the equivalent of building a 6-lane freeway over Montara Mountain and through the middle of McNee Ranch State Park. A roadbed excavation is at a minimum 76 feet wide and up to 100 feet wide in places. And it's going through the only remaining large undisturbed natural habitat that's on the San Mateo coast. And because of its position on the San Mateo coast, which is sort of one of the transition areas between northern and southern California, there's plant and animal communities on that mountain that exist really no place else in the entire world. And this freeway would plow right through the middle of them and basically disrupt them.
I'd say that the mountain is under a pending sentence of death from the State Department of Transportation. They want to put a 4-lane bypass right through the heart of the mountain and the heart of the state park in which we're located right now. They want to do this in order to open up the coast for runaway development, and it will be an absolute disaster for the mountain, for the park, for the coast. They're going to utilize 17 major fills up to 300 feet tall, 16 major cuts up to 250 feet deep. It is just exactly the sort of dinosaur road that we freely built back in the 50s and 60s, but which we can no longer afford for both monetary and environmental reasons.
The existing environmental impact statement for the bypass was finalized in 1986, and because more than 3 years had passed, there was a federal requirement that that be reevaluated. We believed that, and still do believe, that there are many situations that have changed that need to be reflected in that document, not the least of which is the fact that the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary had come into effect, and that there was new information on debris flow probability. It had been determined that there was a major significant population of steelhead in one of the nearby watersheds, San Pedro Creek, and there was the discovery of an additional endangered species, Hickman's cinquefoil, in the bypass alignment. So we believe that the bypass had enormous environmental hurdles ahead of it. And if Caltrans didn't see it that way, they were certainly going to be seeing it in the form of additional lawsuits.
In addition to environmental concerns, many people opposed the freeway bypass for safety reasons. As a matter of fact, early in the century, the main road between Pacifica and the mid-coast ran over Montara Mountain, but was moved down to the current alignment because of a major problem with fog at high elevations.
But I find it very ironic that people in San Mateo County lived with the road crossing the Saddle Pass for 5 years and couldn't stand that road and wanted to get back to a nice smooth road along the ocean front. And then today, we're back in that same kind of discussion. Should we keep Highway 1 where it is, or should we build a new road over the Saddle Pass? Well, people in 1915, they knew the road over the Saddle Pass was no good. They knew the fog was hideous. They knew the grades were too intense to get a road up over a pass in such a short distance. And in 1915, people made a decision that they wanted to stay along the ocean bluffs where it was out of the fog, flat, and curve-free.
The 1995 road closure unleashed deep-seated emotions over the permanent repair of Highway 1. Attempting to avoid a stalemate, County Supervisors Ted Lempert and Ruben Barales pulled together an independent panel of geologists and engineers to take an objective look at Devil's Slide.
So we assembled a group of experts from universities in the Bay Area and other engineering and geological experts together to have them spend some time looking at the site, looking at documents that they could get access to so they could help us flesh out some of the alternatives. Unanimously, they went around and said, based on their independent look at the site and going through the materials, that they all felt that a tunnel was an alternative, that they were stunned that it had not been fleshed out more thoroughly.
And at that time, when the tunnel alternative became public, I think that a lot of people felt that at last there was a solution that would be a compromise for all parties. So the community in general kind of jumped on that idea. I think it was just exciting to have another alternative.
After the experts gave their conclusions to us, Supervisor Borales and I wrote a letter to the director of Caltrans saying, here are the conclusions of these 12 experts. We gave them their names and backgrounds and said, obviously a tunnel has not been explored. We could find one paragraph in Caltrans documents over the last 20 years in terms of their official review of a tunnel, and said that we need all their background information on a tunnel, and we need a tunnel to be looked at and studied. And we received a letter back from Caltrans saying that they would not consider our request for information unless the full Board of Supervisors requested it, which was one of the more stunning documents I've ever received. My understanding was that any individual could send a letter requesting information and should get it back from a public agency. And so I was a little surprised when the two of us as supervisors wrote officially to request it, and we're essentially told no. And so it was at that point we did the only thing we could do, and we took it to the full board and said Caltrans is saying they won't give us any information and won't look into a tunnel any further unless the full board asks them. And we were unsuccessful in March of '95 in getting that to occur.
I certainly, along with many fellow citizens, was completely outraged that the Board of Supervisors could possibly, that any elected official could possibly vote against providing information to the public about a possible solution at Devil's Slide.
A lot of people were angry, and I guess I kind of took some of that anger home myself, and I said, well, I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to know what is the mystery with this information and why can't we get it. So I called up Caltrans and I said, look, I have some of these documents and they refer to other documents. Where are those documents? How can I get these things? Well, they said, well, we'll fax you some stuff. So they faxed me over about 11 pages of material. And I said, well, is that all there is? And they said, yeah, that's it. And I'd read through all the documents. There's more documents here. Each of these documents refer to more documents. And I kept calling them back, and they, oh, well, we found a few more things. And they faxed me over about another dozen pages, and amidst that was this Roberts memo. And I sat on it all weekend, and I was looking at this thing, and I said, well, geez, it shows that these guys had studied the tunnel in '74 and '83 and '84, and then they looked at it again in '93, and here the tunnel was coming out much cheaper than the Caltrans spokesman was saying it was. What was interesting here too is that they tried to say that it had to be either a twin bore tunnel. And in this, what Roberts states is, if the purpose of the project is to bypass the slide and not to increase the current highway capacity, then alternative number 1 should be selected, a 2-lane single-bore tunnel.
And when the tunnel idea, hit the streets, people became very enthused about this and wanted more information about it. And subsequently, as more and more volunteers and people got interested in the issue, we got a little more sophisticated and very shortly thereafter got a model.
Okay, this model shows a section of the mid-coast that goes from Lindamar in Pacifica to the Chart House in Montara. This is the current alignment of Highway 1 as we have it now. This is the Devil's Slide, the section where we have the road collapsing when we get the heavy rains every 10 or 12 years. And these are the 2 projects that have been devised to solve this problem here. Caltrans wants to build a 4.5-mile long bypass going through Shamrock Ranch in Pacifica and McNeil Ranch State Park. The tunnel instead will be less than a mile long, will be leveled, will have only a 1% grade, and as tunnels are, is much more stable during earthquakes.
One of the things that convinced me is I talked to several engineers about earthquake safety and found out that the tunnel is the safest place during an earthquake. You look at structures all around the Bay Area that fell during the Loma Prieta earthquake, the Cypress structure and 280 in San Francisco, they all fell down. But all the other tunnels in the Bay Area, the Caldecott, the Waldo, the Presidio, not a single tunnel had any damage. Even the BART tunnels were totally fine.
Basically, the tunnel has a number of selling points. Safety, we believe it could be built more quickly, and we believe it could be built for less money than the bypass.
I took it on myself to go to the Chamber of Commerce and suggest that they host a forum just to essentially give a chance to really look at the two options fairly and squarely. And we had representatives of Caltrans and Federal Highway Administration, and we had an independent tunnel firm that had not had any experience with the issue at all, also an environmental consultant. And in any case, we had an excellent forum in which the issue was really discussed very objectively. And again, the message was compelling that the tunnel just appeared to be a most viable solution.
In August of 1995, the Federal Highway Administration finally required Caltrans to take another look at the tunnel. But from the beginning, the Caltrans study was anything but objective.
Their official response to the Federal Highway's request for a study was, sure, we'll study a tunnel and show that it will not work. And that official response was so, I don't need to say it, ludicrous to even strong bypass supporters that they realized that the agency had really lost its sense of what a public agency should be, and that is representing the public, and instead had their own agenda.
Caltrans is making all the major decisions, as is its habit when it comes to double slide. Caltrans will determine the tunnel width, which is the same thing as saying the tunnel cost. Caltrans will determine which tunnels are safe. They have already publicly declared that our 46-foot tunnel is unsafe, even though it's wider than any tunnel in the Bay Area except for the Treasure Island Tunnel. And although there are no standards whatsoever which would say that our tunnel is unsafe, Caltrans has just arbitrarily declared it to be unsafe.
What we anticipate at this point is that they will inflate the cost of the tunnel well beyond what the current cost of the bypass is.
In an effort to give the people a say in the permanent solution for Devil's Slide, Save Our Coast and Citizens Alliance for the Tunnel Solution came together to launch a citizen initiative that will appear on the San Mateo County ballot in November 1996.
It was a rousing success. We qualified the initiative with almost 35,000 signatures. We needed 22,000. And again, this is a clear indication of how excited people in the county are about this solution. The initiative will amend the local coastal plan and will authorize the construction of a tunnel rather than the bypass.
Right now, the bypass is in our land use plan as the preferred alternative, with very little objective evaluation behind that. All the initiative does is make the tunnel the preferred alternative.
What I love about it is it's in the hands of the people at this point. All we need to do as a community is rise up, vote for Measure T, and we'll have a solution.
I'd like to show my children and all those yet to come a place where they can go to restore their mind and soul. Sing glory to the mountain, sing glory to the sea, sing glory to the mountain, sing glory, glory be.